Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. My name is Richard Dent, and I have the pleasure and honour of being your MC for today. In what is now Collins Street, we're meeting on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Our Zoom guests, of course, may be on Wurundjeri, Bunurong, or other Indigenous, I shall speak up, yeah. Our Zoom guests might be on Wurundjeri, Bunurong, or perhaps other Indigenous land. I acknowledge the wonderful creation story of the Wurundjeri people, the story of Bunjil the eagle, who created all living things in this story. And according to that story, flew through the very air where we are now and who created all of these lands and all of these waters. I acknowledge the long traditions of the Kulin Nation, pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend our respect to all Indigenous Australians present today, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never granted to the colonisers. Welcome to our hybrid meeting, and to those online and to those in the room. Thanks today will be given by Suresh Muckington, followed by the Loyal Toast, presented by President Reg. Please ensure that your glass is charged. Thanks, Suresh.
Thank you, Richard. President Reg, fellow Rotarians and guests, good afternoon. By the end of 1915, when Allied forces were evacuated from the Turkish peninsula, over 8,000 Australian and New Zealand soldiers had been killed. The Anzacs were all volunteers. There was no conscription. On the 25th April 1916, General John Monash paraded the troops in Egypt. On this day, every year thereafter, we remember and thank all those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country throughout the years and have given us the freedom that we enjoy today. It is a day that we reflect and learn of the horror of purposeless war. As Bertrand Russell put it so well, war does not determine who is right, but only who is left. Let us also spare a thought for those of who have lost their lives recently, not only in Ukraine, but everywhere else in the world. As Dwight Eisenhower put it, there is no glory in battle worth the blood it costs. It is a day for realizing how blessed we are to live in this wonderful country. We should all be proud that this continent's First Nation are the oldest continuing nations in the world. Equally, Australia is also one of the youngest nations, formed on the 1st of January 1901. So our continent hosts one of the youngest nations and also the oldest nations of the world. We are unique. Anzac is merely not about loss. It is about courage and endurance and duty and the love of country and mateship and good humor and the survival of a sense of self-worth and decency in the face of dreadful odds, as the Honorable Sir William Dean put it so well in 1999. They shall grow not old as that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Peace is the virtue of civilization. War is its crime, said Victor Hugo. Each year, Rotary awards up to 130 fully funded fellowships for dedicated leaders around the world. Through academic training, practice, and global networking opportunities, the Rotary Peace Center programs develop the capacity of peace and development professionals to become effective catalysts for peace. For as Mother Teresa said, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. For good food, good fellowship, and the opportunity to serve, we give thanks.
Rotarians and guests, a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia, Rotary International. Thank you. Please be seated. We will be breaking now for lunch. And for those online, you'll be invited to join a breakout room where you can enjoy fellowship with others who are online, or you can go and have something to eat yourself. We will reconvene at around 1:10, where Professor Doherty will be joining us to speak via Zoom. Members, visitors and guests, it is my great pleasure to welcome to welcome you to our 37th meeting of this Rotary year and our 4,933rd club meeting in our 101st year. It's wonderful to see you all here today, and a number I know are here for the first time in a while, and it's great to see you. And thank you also to everyone who's attending online. And what a great honour we have today with our honorary member, esteemed Professor Peter Doherty AC, a Nobel laureate, returning as our guest speaker and beaming in himself via Zoom, essentially because of just a couple of COVID concerns that he has. Much like he did at the beginning of the pandemic just 2 years ago, where he got Rotary Melbourne front and centre in Australia in explaining what this virus was all about for our community. He's going to give us some insights on the opportunities that the pandemic has created from his viewpoint, and I think he has seen a lot of those opportunities emerging. Rosemary Nixon, our chair for the day, will be introducing Professor Doherty in much more detail. In the meantime, please join me in making him welcome. Also here as a club guest today and for the induction into the club, we have Abaz Tareen. Abaz is accompanied by his dad, AK Tareen, and they both hail from India, but they're both Australian citizens, I believe, and Baz will be introduced to you when we do the induction shortly. Would you please acknowledge and make these guests welcome? We have visiting Rotarians, visitors and guests of members. I invite you and your host to stand when your name is announced and ask that you please remain standing to enable the club to welcome you collectively when I've finished the introductions. The first is visiting Rotarian from the Rotary Club of, Rotary E-Club of Melbourne, Gabe Howe. And guests of Rotarians, we have Deborah Davis, who's here with Vice President Peter Davis, Millicent Nink, who's here with member Trevor Nink, Maddie Jones, who's a guest of one of our online participants, Christina Boys, and Andre Martinovici, who is here with his mum, Ramona, also a member of the club. Please make each of our guests most welcome. Now I'd like to invite Abaz or Baz to come and join me on the podium for his induction.
Thanks, President Reg. You're always ahead of the game. That's the problem. Anyway, President Reg, it gives me much pleasure to introduce for membership of the club, Abaz Tareen, who holds the position of Assistant Manager at Honda Australia. And he is also a full-time student at the Melbourne Business School. Well, he has to juggle that a bit. So, and you'll have the classification of engineering mechanical. And as President Reg said, he's a former president of the Rotary Club of Madras Next Generation. So he's very familiar with Rotary. He'll be a member of the Central 2 group and will be known in the club as Baz. Thanks, President Reg.
Thanks so much, Austin. And now I'll get on with the induction properly. Abaz Tareen, we welcome you as a member of the Rotary Club of Melbourne. You have been chosen because your fellow members believe you to be a leader in your vocation and have the personal and professional qualities that will ensure the principles of Rotary will be safe in your hands. As a former member of the Rotary Club of Madras Next Gen, you are already experienced in the application of the objects of Rotary, and with the help of your fellow members, you will, I'm sure, quickly feel comfortable in the championship and service of our organisation. companionship and service of our organisation. The Rotary badge you'll receive in a moment, as you well know, is your entry to thousands of Rotary clubs around the world. Baz, we welcome you most warmly into continued membership of Rotary. And so with this expectation, I offer you the right hand of fellowship and ask that members join me in welcoming you to membership of the club. Baz, welcome. And now I'm going to invite, we have just a little bit of work to do to pop a name tag on, and I think we'll just, your sponsor is going to attach that for you when you're seated. But right now, if you could say a few words for us, we'd be most grateful. And then we'll just stop for a picture.
Thank you so much, President Reg and Austin, for this. Really appreciate it. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. My name is Baz, as you've heard, and it's an honor to be here at this club. I do have an association, and I've had an association with the Rotary Club for about 5 years now, and my dad, who's here, has had an association for the last 15 years. Yeah, and like I mentioned, it's a real honor to be here as part of the Rotary Club of Melbourne and just continue serving under the badge of Rotary here in Australia. So I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible, building lifelong relationships, and yeah, helping our local community and the world at large. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Baz. Okay. Now, I'd like now to invite Rotarian Peter Berg, our Safe Families Ambassador, to come to the podium to update us on the Safe Families project.
Thank you, President Reg, for providing the opportunity today to show a short film on Rotary Safe Families, which can be viewed on the Rotary Safe Families website. Rotary Safe Families is a program which has emphasised that women are the main victims of domestic and family abuse in Australia, with 1 in 6 women having experienced it in some form from a current or former partner. However, it's important to recognise that men can also be victims of abuse from a partner or family member. Domestic violence and abuse towards men is not often mentioned in the media or generally talked about, but there are many male victims and they need to be heard, taken seriously and to be believed, and not to be ridiculed or told to man up. Governments also need to fund counselling, service and shelters for male victims. The short film that follows shows how the 3 R's of the Rotary Safe Families program can be used to assist men when subjected to domestic abuse. Dorothy Gilmore and her Safe Families team have done a great job in producing this short film. So here it is, and I'll just say a few words after the film. Thanks, Joe.
It often goes unreported and can seem hard to believe, but 1 in 16 men have experienced physical or sexual violence at the hands of a current or former partner. Even more suffer at the hands of family members, such as adult children, a step-parent, uncle or father. Whilst some abuse can be violent and physical, it's more often emotional. It often goes unreported and can seem intimate partners may threaten to never let them see their children again, make threats to financially ruin them, or threaten to make false allegations of violence to the police if their terms are not met. Suffer at the hands of family members, such as adult children. Studies suggest that only 20% of men who experience violence and abuse speak up and seek help, as it challenges their and society's perceptions of what it is to be a man. Intimate partners may threaten to never let them see their children. So let's look at how to recognise the signs to try and increase reporting and help reduce abuse. There are, of course, the more obvious physical signs resulting from a fight or self-defence. Studies suggest that only 20% of men who experience but harder to recognise are the emotional and psychological signs, like being bullied or emotionally coerced. Perhaps you haven't seen a relative or friend socially for longer than normal. Or you suspect they're being prevented from seeing their children, or their finances are being controlled. If you believe something is wrong, you need to raise your concerns safely. Subtly begin to see if they'll open up to you. But harder to recognize are the emotional and psychological. If this doesn't work, you'll need to follow up, especially if things seem to be getting worse. You haven't seen a relative or friend socially. Next, you should refer them for professional support. Or you suspect they're being prevented from seeing their children. If you fear for their immediate safety, call 000. If you believe something Otherwise, these national organisations will help support and guide them appropriately. Subtly begin to see if they'll open up to you. Learning and putting into action these 3 R's can create the path to physical and psychological safety, as you've just seen. Rotary Safe Families, stopping abuse in families everywhere. If you fear for their immediate safety, call 000.
Thanks, Joe. Having viewed the film, here are some questions to ask ourselves that feature in the discussion notes on the Safe Families website. What outcome and future do we think Doug will have if the abuse towards him is not identified? Could Doug develop into a perpetrator of abuse as a defence for his treatment by others? And what would stop us from using the Safe Families 3 R's to assist the male who is being abused in recognising the signs, raising concerns safely, and referring the victim for appropriate professional support? And finally, would we share what we know from the messages that we've just seen with family, friends, and work colleagues? Well, thanks for listening and watching. And next week, we'll be showing a short film on child abuse. Thank you.
I'd now like to call Mary Barry, past president, to the podium to join us on the training of club mentors. This adds to the call to action that we received at the last meeting from Mark Laser. Please, Mary.
Thank you, President Reg, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, 4 years ago, our new members mentoring program was initiated. Since then, over 30 new members have been mentored by the club's 15 trained mentors. We are now at a point in time where we need to find more mentors within our existing membership, so we can continue to not only attract new members, such as Baz, who's been inducted today, and welcome, but to also retain members. As we know, maintaining a new member's level of enthusiasm while helping them figure out how they can engage and contribute to ways of meaningful for them in the club will ensure that they feel part of Rotary Melbourne from the beginning. Then they will develop their own involvement over a period of time. Typically, a mentor will maintain a close relationship with the mentee for at least the first 6 months of their membership. After that, it becomes more informal. The mentoring program has been widely hailed by mentees as an outstanding success in helping them when they first join the club. So what is involved in mentoring and how do you become a Rotary mentor? A Rotary Melbourne mentor can be best described as a coach who also passes on and shares their lived experience and knowledge about the structure, projects, and opportunities we offer to all members of the club. Existing members who have a good understanding for how the club operates, who enjoy helping people, and who want to see this club continue to grow, diversify, and flourish will make an excellent mentor. All you have to do is attend a 1.5-hour training session that will be held over the next few weeks at our office or online. Existing members or mentors are more than welcome to attend any of the sessions as a refresher course. New mentors will be provided with a short manual that covers all they need to know about their role, together with guidelines and what they can discuss with their mentees and how they can support and help them. Being a Rotary mentor is a great gift you can offer new members of our club. Training sessions, which will be run by myself, will be held in person and online as follows. Wednesday, 27th of April, Rotary office, 2:30 to 4 p.m. Wednesday, the 4th of May, also at the office, 2:30 to 4. Wednesday, the 11th of May, it's a Zoom, 5:30 till 7, and Wednesday, 25th of May, also a Zoom, 5:30 till 7. So if you would like to know more about becoming a new member's mentor, or you would like to do the training or both, please contact Robert Fisher, who's the current membership review chair and mentoring program coordinator. And his contact details are on the directory or on the website. So I look forward to hearing from some of you, and I know you will make wonderful mentors. I can see a lot of faces out there who have the capacity, the skill, and the passion to do it. So please put your hands up and make sure our club continues to grow and flourish over its second 100 years. Our new members are depending on you to do so. Thank you.
One final notice before we call on our speaker. I'd just like to point out to everyone that we have a social gathering looming on the 12th of May for club members, colleagues and friends. And the sole purpose of this gathering is to get together and have some fun following the challenging COVID restrictions that we don't really need to talk about anymore. It's a great opportunity to socialise and enjoy a night of superb both food and wine at a marvellous Q restaurant, which happens to be called Crew in Glenferrie Road. The event begins at about 6:30 on the 12th of May. The cost will be $60 per person. It includes tapas and a glass of wine. The prize to be won will be a rare bottle of Pinot Noir and a chance to win back your Crew dinner entry ticket. Register your spot today for this special night. Details in the bulletin. And also consider as a social group, you know, your local Rotary Melbourne group. Perhaps you could make this a group event and come along and extend your socialisation that way. Details are going to be published regularly in the bulletin. You can buy your tickets on Humanitix. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the chair for the day, Rosemary Nixon, to come to the podium to introduce our guest speaker.
Thanks, President Reg. Well, it's my great honour to introduce Professor Peter Doherty, who of course needs no introduction because he's been here before, and hasn't he been such a visible face to guide us through the pandemic. Of course, he shared the 1996 Nobel Medicine Prize with a Swiss colleague for discoveries about transplantation and killer T-cell mediated immunity. And we've learned a lot about immunity in recent times. He's a fellow of numerous learned colleges, has more than 20 honorary doctorates, more than 500 research papers. He was Australian of the Year in 1997 and Companion of the Order of Australia the same year. And he's going to talk to us about opportunities for Australian research, development, and manufacturing. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for the introduction. I'll start just basically, I've been totally focused on COVID for the last couple of years, and I'll give you a kind of update on that and say where that's taken us with respect to product development and research in Australia. As we're all aware, and we've lived through in Melbourne particularly, we shut down for a very long time for COVID. And then at some point, we decided, the politicians decided that basically it's over. And a lot of the population were pretty over it too. And we've opened up. So as a result, now we have substantial numbers of COVID cases in the community. And I think they've just ramped up a bit, which is not surprising after Easter. And the virus, the Omicron variant, is spreading. But what we achieved by locking down and by being careful is that we got our population to a stage where the very great majority of extremely vulnerable people, the over 70s and over 80s and so forth, were vaccinated, double vaccinated at least, many triple vaccinated. And a substantial part of the population was to some extent protected. As we were first opening up, the Delta variant was around, and the vaccine really still, though it was developed against that early Wuhan strain, still was working pretty well against the virus. It was the antibodies that were made in response were still neutralizing the virus, and we were doing pretty well with that. And the problems we were seeing, and a significant number of deaths, were in people who had not been vaccinated for one reason or another, often to do with confusion or with an anti-vaccination stance that they had contracted as part of their problem. So when Omicron came along, though, the antibody side of the response, as far as we're aware, is not working nearly as well. And the consequence of that is that though the vaccine was reasonably protective at stopping people getting infected with Delta, and also very effective in keeping them out of hospital, with the Omicron strain, the strain has changed to the extent that the vaccine is no longer very effective in stopping people getting infected. Stopping people getting infected depends on having antibodies, these small molecules that float around in blood and are very specific for virus up in the nose, so that they can grab hold of the virus before it starts to infect cells up here and either stop or very much limit that initial stage of infection. And Omicron sort of just blows through that for many people. So many people are getting infected who've been triple or double or even triple vaccinated, but they haven't been getting so sick as they've needed to be admitted to hospital, and they haven't been dying. And though when you look at the statistics, the numbers of cases that are hospitalized, there are more vaccinated people involved than unvaccinated people. If you look at my age group in the 80s and so forth, 99% of people are actually vaccinated. So the fact that you've still got substantial numbers in the unvaccinated puts their susceptibility very high. And that's an issue for them. Now, we've learnt as scientists, both here and around the world, we've learnt an enormous amount about the human immune system and about what happens when you multiply vaccinate adults in quick succession from the COVID experience. When you think about it, we don't normally vaccinate adults multiple times over a short period. We may give children a couple of shots of a particular vaccine, but we don't do that with adults. So we've been learning a lot, and with very sophisticated technologies that we're able to apply, for instance, in our institute and at the Kirby Institute in Sydney and various places in Australia and internationally. We've learned a great deal about the cellular immune response, the antibody forming cells, the B cells, and the T cell responses. And that has actually taken the whole science of immunology of infection a long way forward, and we're still digesting that information and still developing it. So in a sense, COVID has been a bit like a war. When you've got a war, you get the development of new technologies like jet engines and so forth, and unfortunately things like nuclear bombs. But that's also true for this pandemic. It has actually moved a lot of science forward. Now, as far as funding of the science goes in Australia, we've benefited from the fact that Tony Abbott set up the Medical Research Futures Fund to augment the normal funding for research through National Health and Medical Research Council, the MRC, the NHMRC and the ARC. And that money, which to some extent we were thinking was being regarded as a bit of a slush fund for a bit of pork barreling, really, prior to the pandemic, has actually been put to pretty good effect through the pandemic, funding the sort of research that's needed to be done. And in general, I'd like to give credit to the health minister, the federal health minister, Minister Hunt, for a pretty good performance through this. I think mistakes have been made. The government have made mistakes. Everyone's made mistakes, but I think they've performed pretty well in this respect. And so that money has been deployed a lot towards COVID. Now, that means a lot of that money hasn't been deployed somewhere else. So a lot of other areas of research have been funding. And though you may not be very aware of it, our percentage of our national budget that's dedicated to research and development has been steadily falling over the last decade, and a bit more, in fact. Under John Howard, we got very favourable treatment. Howard liked science. He increased the size of the medical research budgets. He increased the size of the Australia Research Council budgets. But this has been steadily falling, and that together with the enormous hit that the universities have taken in losing their international students, an enormous financial hit, where a lot of the money they provided was actually being used to support research. A very bad model for research funding, quite frankly, but at least it was realistic. We are now in a serious situation. So as influential people in the community who may well be in contact with political representatives in government or whatever the government will be in 6 weeks' time, I think if you think it's important, it would be great if you could raise your voices for the support, better support of the university sector and of the research sector, because if we don't fund this, things can't go ahead. And we can't do this kind of, particularly with government funding. You need that kind of money for what we call the discovery end of science. Now, what's happened through COVID is that in our institute and in other institutions across the country and internationally, a lot of people who are really known for basic science, the kind of science you fund through NH and MRC, switched their talents into development and research on COVID. And a particular case in point would be my colleague Dale Godfrey, who's a fantastic immunologist who was studying cells called the NKT cells, always a bit obscure, and I teased him about it. He switched all his research into developing one of the new Australian COVID vaccines. And you have been reading about that because that new vaccine has just gone into clinical trial, along with a parallel vaccine that's been largely developed through Monash University, an mRNA vaccine. Now, what's interesting about these two Australian vaccines is they're subunit vaccines. They're against what we call the receptor binding domain of the spike protein. If you understand that the vaccines we've had so far have all been directed against the spike protein, the main protein on the virus that binds to the virus, to the cell, lets the virus get into the cell and start producing, because viruses have to get into cells to produce. This is just against that end bit. And we think we may run around some problems that we've encountered, which we refer to by the colourful name of original antigenic sin, where you tend to boost the response to the previous strain rather than the one you want for the new strain. We think we may get around that with some of these mRNA vaccines. Now, what's also happened on the vaccine front, which is very important for us, I think, is that the Moderna company, which, and some of you will have had the Moderna mRNA vaccine. I've so far had 2 doses of the AstraZeneca, 1 of the Pfizer and 1 of the Moderna, because I'm eligible for that 4th shot. So I've had the whole batch that are available in Australia. That these Moderna vaccines, which have been the best of all the vaccines, I think, Moderna will now establish manufacturing in Victoria. That's involved a lot of buy-in, particularly from the state government, and I think some from the federal government. Our state government has been great in promoting innovation. They've done that for a long time, and they've done that when both sides, it's been a bipartisan issue. We've seen both sides of politics do that, and I very much hope that whatever happens in later state elections, we'll see that continue, because it sees Victoria emerge as a major manufacturing place for new order products, because we all understand, I think, we have to transform a lot of our business earning sector, particularly on the international front, into new types of industry and new types of development. And Moderna is talking about making 100 million doses a year of vaccine in Australia. Now, so these 2 vaccines that I've talked about briefly, the subunit vaccines, one from us, one from Monash, working together, have both now gone into phase 1 clinical trial in Australia. And that's another great thing of Australia. We have very good capacity for doing what we call phase 1 and even phase 2 clinical trials. We find it difficult to do the really big ones, the phase 3, and it will generally go offshore for that. Or we may be a node, one of the hubs for doing a big phase 3 vaccine trial across multiple communities. Australia has great advantages in this. We have a high level of professionalism, And basically, we also have very diverse, ethnically diverse communities, because now people want to see vaccines tested in different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, different genetic backgrounds too. And for instance, our Australian Indigenous people have some genetic features which differentiate them from the later European immigrations, which are important with respect to vaccination, specifically for T-cell vaccines. So that's part of the development in Australia. We're going to be making mRNA vaccines here. Now, the other thing is, though, that we have a lot of talent and sophisticated scientific expertise with mRNA, the message. It's not a gene therapy giving an mRNA vaccine. The DNA makes what we call messenger RNA, and if messenger RNA is basically the template on which the proteins are built, and the proteins are, of course, the stuff we need for a vaccine. So Dale Godfrey's vaccine, they'll be actually injecting the protein that's made outside the body in big fermentation tanks and whatever, in various types of bacterial or insect systems or whatever. But the mRNA vaccine that's from Monash, you inject the mRNA into the body, and the body is the factory that makes the new protein. So not only is that mRNA strategy useful for vaccines, it's also a very exciting possibility here for totally new drugs. And that's where I think a lot of the focus on these things needs to be. Because with Omicron, for instance, the vaccine is not working nearly as well as it did. In fact, it surprises me, given the change in the spike protein between Omicron and the original strain, that it's still working at all. But it does seem to be working to keep us out of hospital. And that's what's important. Now, but drugs will work against all the variants of COVID-2. They'll work, in fact, against all the coronaviruses, because the drugs are targeted not to the proteins that are changing because of antibody-mediated effects and so forth, and because they add transmission. They're directed against much more conserved bits of the virus that are involved in the virus replication. And so if we can, what we need to do globally, and this is being recognized and people are going about this, big funding available from the United States, is make drugs against all these potential pandemic threat viruses. And that includes the coronavirus, all the coronaviruses, obviously the influenza viruses. We have some pretty good drugs there, but we need more. The Henipaviruses, the Hendra and Nipah type viruses that we've experienced in Australia, also bat-borne. We need to make drugs against all those classes of viruses. Now we have at last some for COVID-2. And one of these drugs, Paxlovid particularly, it's what's called a protease inhibitor. So it blocks some of the, blocks the replication of the virus. There's another one called molnupiravir, which is a nucleoside analog, a little bit, not quite as good, a little bit dangerous because in drive mutation, but still a reasonably effective drug. These drugs are, because our government was sufficiently foresighted when these started to come along, to order large amounts, large numbers of doses. These drugs are now either available or will soon be available for prescription by your doctor through your pharmacy. The two drugs are molnupiravir and Paxlovid. So that's something to keep in mind, especially for those of us who are older. You need to take these drugs right as soon as you can after getting infected. So for older people, there's a high risk still that even if you're multiply vaccinated, you can get fairly sick. If you can get Paxlovid or molnupiravir into your system early, you can stop the infection basically, and it will clear the virus, and you get a lot better a lot quicker. So it's something to be aware of. If particularly for the older people over 65, if you've got several complications, comorbidities, I think it drops to 2 comorbidities if you're over 75. You should be able to get Paxlovid either through reporting to the online reporting service or through your GP prescribing through the physician, though I'm not sure. I think that's supposed to be in place in May. I'm not sure it is now. So keep that in mind. Make sure if you get the infection that it's properly notified so you can be helped if you need it, because it could be make a big difference. What we don't know with Omicron is how much of this long COVID we're going to see with it. and long COVID in the continuing medium to long-term frame is maybe our biggest problem with this thing. Chronic weariness, fatigue, and all that type of syndrome that seems to be at a really reasonably high incidence with SARS-CoV-2. And though, as I said, Omicron is generally less severe, though part of that is because lots of people across the planet have been infected before, and that basically also a lot of us have been multiply vaccinated. So the things to be aware of is that these drugs are or will be available depending on your age status and so forth, and that keep a watch on that. Also, if you haven't had your third vaccine shot or your fourth vaccine shot, whatever you're eligible for, it is boosting the antibody response to Omicron, and we can pick up antibodies where we couldn't pick them up before. These were actually cross-reactive antibodies that have been stimulated by the earlier vaccine, but we just hadn't brought them up to a high enough level, and the vaccination is bringing them up to a high enough level. Now, the future for Australian drug, vaccine, manufacturing and that sort of thing, it will depend. It depends on government getting the settings right for things like tax relief and assistance. It also depends on entrepreneurship, and it depends on building much closer ties between the business and the academic communities. I think a lot of that's been going on for a long time. We're getting much better at it. Still probably got a way to go. When we talk about importing people with real skills, probably bringing people in that have a lot more of that entrepreneurial business skill would be at a very high level, would be a real plus for the country. I think I guess we're all hoping in the university type sector and medical sector that COVID will give us something of a reset in the way that we're approaching the business of business in Australia. I hope that happens. CSL is building a major new building on Elizabeth Street, so that's great. CSL is or Seqirus, as it's probably called now, is a wonderful player in Australia. We could have easily lost it when the old CSL was sold off, but fortunately the company has seen benefit in keeping a lot of its activities in Australia, not all. I mean, it owns the major blood products industry in Germany, basically, that used to be part of the Behring company. And so, but I think that's where we need to see things going, because this is one area where we're really effective. I think there are other areas where we're really effective too. Because of the nature of our political process, the function and role of universities is not front and center. For instance, in this election campaign, that's not where the votes come from. There's not enough votes in it for either party, quite frankly, and we're not hearing much. We've lost a major champion of research and technological development in Senator Kim Carr, who on that side of politics was a great advocate. And what we've lacked, I think, over the 10 years of the current Liberal National Party government is actually someone at a high level in that government who is really committed to this area. This is an area that takes champions, and you have to have political and public champions that drive this forward, because it's never going to be the one that brings in the greatest numbers of votes to win elections. Maybe we need to start running our country in a somewhat different way and not have everyone constantly running for re-election, but actually running and governing to run this country and bring it forward into a new era. So thanks very much for listening.
And aren't we delighted to hear from a champion, and we really respect your efforts over the years. I'm going to self-indulgently ask you, Peter, I've had 2 AstraZeneca and 1 Moderna. What should I get next?
Well, I'd had 2 AstraZeneca and 1 Pfizer, so I got Moderna the next, and I got to the other arm. Now, that's about the scientific basis for that is at about the level of praying to the sun god, but there are kind of theoretical reasons you think why that might be a good idea, but honestly, there's no real evidence. And the whole story that I've been telling, I've been writing these online articles for our website called Setting It Straight, and I've done now 101, I think. You know, the early ones were much better, and they're a book called An Insider's Plague Year. But basically, the latter ones often got a bit boring and stuff. But the story I've been telling about how the infection works, it's partly based on what we know with COVID, but not that much. It's partly based on what we know with influenza and other infections. It's partly based on mouse experiments with influenza virus. What we've had to do is put forward a good story. When I talk about what happens in the lymph node, you know, the glands in your arm, a lot of what I'm saying is actually based on experiments from mice, because basically you can't take sick people and rip out their lymph nodes. And even at post-mortem, not as nearly as many people go to post-mortem as used to. I'll qualify that by saying, though I've got an enthusiasm for people going to post-mortem, it's only when they're dead. I mean, no.
Well, Richard has a microphone, and I ask people to give their name and stand up. Thanks.
Bruce Davidson. You are a fantastic scientific communicator. I got everything you said today, and quite often I miss a lot, so I feel very well informed. But I just wanted to remind the club that when you spoke here in person, I think it was in about 2015, you actually said there will be another pandemic. And I think that we should all be reminded about that. It was predicted. I was in the supermarket and I tried to get my wife to buy 10 kilograms of rice, but she said no. No need to respond. I just wanted to remind the club.
Yeah, I've got a colleague who's got a basement full of tuna fish cans of tuna. I mean, he is Jewish, so you know, tuna fish works. But honestly, this won't be the last pandemic, and I'll tell you why I'm saying that is before 2000, we had 2 of these coronaviruses circulating in human populations, both what we call common cold coronaviruses, human coronaviruses. They're called colds and croup. They're one of more than 100 viruses that cause colds and croup. So we didn't worry about them particularly. Sometimes they give a bad experience, but usually not. Since 2000, 5 new coronaviruses have crossed over and have circulated in humans, including the current CoV-2, the MERS one in the Middle East, the original SARS, and 2 new common cold ones. So basically, something has changed, and it's pretty obvious what has changed. Is these viruses are coming out of wildlife. Wildlife markets are common throughout Southeast Asia and Asia in general, because often people don't have refrigeration, they're hot, it's hot areas. People want to buy live animals and then kill them themselves often because they don't have the storage capacity that we have. So these live animal markets, when they're selling wildlife rather than domestic animals, where the domestic animals, the ones that sell chickens, are very dangerous for influenza. And we've known that for a long time. But with coronavirus, it's live animal markets that are selling wildlife for consumption. And that wildlife can include bats and all sorts of species. They're extremely dangerous. But what makes them even more dangerous, and viruses have probably been jumping across into people for a long time from them. But what makes them even more dangerous is the increasing prosperity in places like China. Now, I'm not decrying the increased prosperity of China. That's one of the great things that's happened in China. There are other things that probably should worry us a lot, but the increasing prosperity for the population is good. But what that means is a lot of people are getting on passenger jets and flying out of the country. And that's the way these viruses get around the world on passenger planes. Now, to my mind, 2 things that absolutely need to happen for the future is for a total openness as far as we can with these viruses across the planet. And we need to work through World Health Organization and strengthen the World Health Organization, though there are always complexities and rigidities with any United Nations agency. But the other thing we need to do is to have a global agreement that as soon as something like this is detected in a country, if we'd stopped the planes at the time of the Wuhan outbreak, we might be in much better shape, but it got away. The Chinese stopped their domestic flights, but they didn't stop their international flights. And so if we'd stopped those international flights, we might have had a better shot. And the other thing is we need to make these drugs. We need to make a lot of them. We need to develop new ones. So we're using at least 2 drugs together. You never want to be using one drug because the virus or the cancer cell or whatever it is can mutate away from it. So we need to have cocktails, and we need to have a significant stockpile. So if we get something like a Wuhan event with the new coronavirus, we can drop a lot of Paxlovid or something in there quickly. So as soon as anybody's diagnosed, and we can set up those PCR diagnostic tests in 48 hours, they're really straightforward. As soon as anyone is diagnosed, they're given a course of treatment. Now, you can sort of envisage that as soon as you get your positive PCR or your positive rat, basically you go online, and then a guy on a motor scooter from the local pizza shop or a drone delivers a packet of pills to your doorstep, and you take 2 pills a day for the next 5 days, and that stops it.
Well, thank you again, Peter, for those insights. It's just fantastic, and we really appreciate it. In view of the fact that you're a repeat visitor to the club, we have a massive departure in protocol. We're going to send you a bottle of whiskey.
Look, honestly, you might as well keep it. I don't drink anymore. Look, put the bottle up for raffle.
In that case, it's got to be more socks.
No, I don't need anything. I got more stuff, and I got one of these little houses in central Melbourne. I got more stuff than I can use. Please. No, I'm actually returned to my Methodist youth. I'm teetotal. I'm not dancing either, but that's for other reasons.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank visitors and guests for attending, especially our online folks. It was great that you could join us too. To our MC Richard Dent and Suresh McCandon, our Thanksgiver, our lunch setup, reception teams for their fantastic effort in making this meeting happen. And to remind you that next week is our monthly members lunch here at number 35. We hope you can join us. And please stand to close the meeting with the national anthem.